listen in on a conversation between God and Moses. God is calling Moses to return to Egypt and lead God's people to freedom. The backstory on this, at this point in Israel's history, they are enslaved in Egypt. The population of the Israelites, the Hebrews, is beginning to exceed that of the Egyptians, and Pharaoh is made nervous about this. So, this terrible edict, he puts out that all the boy babies that are born to the Hebrews are to be thrown into the Nile River. Into this, Moses was born. Now, Moses' mother decided that she was going to try to keep, as long as possible, keep this little boy baby. Well, when he was 3 months old, she could no longer hide him. So she took a basket and she waterproofed it. She used pitch to make it waterproof, and she put Moses into this basket, and she set him into the reeds on the edge of the Nile River. And she posted her daughter to see what would happen. Well, Pharaoh's daughter, this was the place that Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe, and sure enough, she came down, and this baby was crying, and so she gets the basket and says, well, this must be one of those little Hebrew babies, and she has compassion on this crying baby. Big sister comes in and says, hey, if you would like, I can get one of the Hebrew mothers to nurse this child. And Pharaoh's daughter says, well, that's a good idea. So she goes and gets Moses' mother and pays her to nurse her own baby. It's just a nice little turn there, I think. And Moses grows up in Pharaoh's household. Fast forward, Moses is out walking there in Egypt, and he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating one of the Hebrew slaves. And he knows that these are his people. He kills the Egyptian. And then he is filled with fear at what might happen when this deed is done. So he flees Egypt. And for many years now, he has been tending his father-in-law's sheep in a faraway place. We're picking this up in Exodus chapter 3. We're going to begin with verse 7, a little earlier than what's printed in your bulletin. We're going to work our way through about the middle of chapter 4. So, who knows, they may appear on the screen, the verses, but if you want to follow along in your Bible, you might have the same page numbers that I do in this Bible. I'm on page 50. This is Old Testament, so it's early in the book, Exodus chapter 3. In fact, it's Genesis, Exodus, number 2 in the books. Hear now the word of God. Oh, this is the burning bush scene. I forgot to mention that. While tending the flocks, Moses comes across this bush that's on fire, but it's not consumed. What is this thing? And the voice of God comes from that bush. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Sound like a tall order? Yeah, it does. My goodness. On the one hand, this is an awesome new vocation that God is giving to Moses. But it's not awesome in the sense of, wow, awesome, dude. It's awesome in the sense of my knees are shaking. I have no idea how this is going to play out. Moses offers 5 objections, or at least points of resistance, to what God is calling Moses to do. And we're going to continue the conversation. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" You know, it's like, oh my, what qualifications do I have? It's like, what, me, little old Mo versus Pharaoh? I don't think so. Here's what God says. God says, "I will be with you. I will be with you." It's interesting what God does not say. God does not come and put his arm around Moses and say, "Now, Moses, you can do this. You're capable. You can." That's not the line at all. That's not. Instead, he says, "I will be with you. I will be with you." You know, sometimes we sense that God's calling us to do something, and we have those exact same words to God. We say, "Well, who am I? You know, I'm not the one to do the who am I?" And God doesn't say to us, "Well, Jeff, you can do this, you can." It's not that at all. It's like, "I will be with you. I will be with you." It has very little to do with what our capabilities are. It's more about who God is than about who we are. And sometimes local churches will kind of get in the same framework. You know, well, he sends God across us, but oh, we can't do this. You know, we're not big enough, rich enough, strong enough, young enough, whatever excuse people, they're just excuses. Because God says, "I will be with you." Now, this isn't an excuse to willy-nilly do anything that we want and just expect God's going to have our back. But when God is calling us, God will be with us. All right, so God goes on to say, he says, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." If I was Moses, I'd be thinking, well, what kind of sign is that? You know, it's like, after the whole thing is done, then you will know that it was me. I like having my signs in advance. You know, it's like, well, do something that's going to assure me now of what's going to happen in the future. I think about Family Promise, which we have talked about over the last several months. Family Promise, if you're just hearing about it for the first time, it's this really wonderful ministry that congregations in the community will share in. Each congregation, 4 times a year, a week at a time, hosts homeless families. Families that have been vetted, they're good candidates for the program, there's no drugs or alcohol. So they come and they stay at your church for 7 nights. And every morning you feed them breakfast, and then they go off to, well, it kind of depends. Kids go to school, mom and or dad. They either go to their job or to a job training program. And then they come back to the church in the evening. The church feeds them the evening meal. It helps the kids with homework. And then there's a place in the church for each family where that's going to be their place for the 7 days. And so they go to sleep, wake up the next morning, repeat. So a highly successful program that's going on in a lot of different communities. Well, you need 13 churches for each church to take 4 different weeks throughout the year. Right now we have 6 or 7 that are signed on, and we really want to, by spring, have all 13 so we can get underway. So you could say, well, the sign that God is in this is when you have 13 congregations that are participating. It's like, so you got to go on faith, you know, on this early time. So that's the sign. That's the sign. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Good. So what the screens are back and all the people rejoice. Well, the preacher did anyway. All right. So where are we now? What's our next? Yes, verse 13. This is the next objection. Moses says, hey, the people are going to need to know the name of your name, because this is a dangerous mission, right? And not just dangerous for Moses, it's dangerous for the people. Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. Now this does not tell Moses much more than what he already knows. Okay, well now we have a name for God, but the name simply means I am. God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this my title for all generations. Now this is actually very helpful, because God is reminding Moses, and the people of Israel are going to be reminded as well of who this God is, because they have history with this God. This is the God of their forefathers, their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Well, now God goes on to give Moses some strategy. Three steps of what's going to happen. At verse 16, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, all the ites, a land flowing with milk and honey. They will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us now go a 3-day journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, says God, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will perform in it. After this, he will let you go. I will bring this people into such favor with the Egyptians that, when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbor, and any woman living in the neighbor's house, for jewelry of silver and of gold and clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. All right, so Moses expressed 2 objections, and here comes the third one. He is fearful that his own people are going to reject him. Chapter 4. Then Moses answered, but suppose they do not believe me or listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? Moses said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake. And Moses drew back from it. Then the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and seize it by the tail. So he reached out his hand and grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand. So that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to you. Again the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. He put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow. Then God said, put your hand back into your cloak. So he put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his body. If they will not believe you or heed the first sign, they may believe the second sign. If they will not believe even these 2 signs or heed you, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. This kind of makes me think of Jesus. Jesus performed signs and wonders, and these bore witness to Jesus' identity and Jesus' relationship to God. So you can see the power of signs and wonders. All right, here comes the 4th objection, and it has to do with Moses' ability to communicate, specifically his speech. Now, we don't know if Moses had some kind of speech impediment. That's a possibility. Or maybe he was just rather plain spoken and thinks that, you have to have flowery language to talk to Pharaoh. Or maybe it was some other deal. Maybe he just wasn't very good with the verbal thrust and parry, and he doesn't think he'll be able to convince Pharaoh. Well, we don't know which of these things it was, but he objects on that basis. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh, my Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Then the Lord said to him, Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak. Here comes the fifth objection. And this is where Moses, God love him, thin ice. This is where he's on thin ice. Listen to what he says. But Moses said, Oh my Lord, please send someone else. Narrator tells us that the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And you know, if you did not know this story, you might expect that the very next thing was that God presses the smite button. You know, just smite Moses and pick somebody else because Moses has said, please, I don't want to do it. Send somebody else. But that's not what happens. That's not what happens. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, What of your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, his heart will be glad. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you what you shall do. He indeed shall speak for you to the people. He shall serve as a mount for you, and you shall serve as God for him. Take in your hand this staff with which you will perform the signs. We've just heard we've heard Moses refuse God's plan A. He said, God, send somebody else. I explained the plan to me, send somebody else. And here's what's amazing to me. God takes Moses' response seriously. He takes it very seriously. And God adapts to Moses. You know, some people think that God runs the world, that everything that happens is God determined in advance that thing was going to happen. I would say this story flies in the face of that theory. Because here you have Moses, who is not with the program. God made it very clear what the plan is, and Moses says, send somebody else. And God adjusts the plan. God comes up with plan B. Okay, now Aaron, and there are kind of mixed results on how this works with Aaron, but Aaron comes into the picture, and God says, all right, Aaron will do the talking. But this doesn't let Moses off